Hello everyone. Today we are going to be learning about Daffodils by William Wordsworth. Let's start with the summary and about the author. A great lover of nature, William Wordsworth had once wandered aimlessly, just like a cloud that floats in the sky. He suddenly came across countless of golden daffodils by the side of a lake. Those golden daffodils were fluttering and dancing in the air, appearing like stars twinkling in the sky. They made it as if they were dancing in a frenzy. The poet compares the golden daffodils with the stars that shine and twinkle in the sky. The poet feels the number of daffodils as never ending as the stars in the Milky Way. Now, the waves of the lakes are also dancing besides the daffodils, but the daffodils are so superior in their dance that they even surpassed the waves in happiness. Now, the poet gets extremely delighted with such a pleasant company. According to the poet, he could scarcely realize that he was collecting a treasure in his mind, something that he will adore and remember forever. And as time went on, the poet found himself in a vacant, a pensive, and a gloomy mood. But the beautiful sight of daffodils became a memory for him to remember. And soon they began appearing in his mind, and that recollection filled him with joy and extraordinary delight. In a nutshell, or a short summary, the poem shows how William Wordsworth, a pantheist. By pantheist, we mean a religion that worships the universe and the nature as whole, derives extraordinary bliss in the most ordinary things. Next, we should start with the first stanza and its explanation. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, besides a lake beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Now, did you guys notice the contrasts in this stanza? The poet is depicted as a single and lonely person. The daffodils aren't just a crowd, but a host. Now, let's all think about the various meanings of the word host. It has many meanings, but when we use it as a collective noun, as a word that describes and captures many, it is mostly used to refer angels. This meaning recalls one of the most fundamental concerns of most romantic poets. They think of nature as others think of religion. For them, nature is like a religion. What the poet can derive from the observations of this natural world is no less important than the lessons taught by religious doctrines. By comparing himself to a cloud, the poet is trying to participate in the natural order of things. Or maybe he just wants to escape and avoid confronting whatever issues that make him lonely. Also, one more thing that is interesting in this stanza is the difference between the actions of fluttering and dancing. Usually, something flutters because something else causes it to flutter, such as the wind. Now, this is a passive action, but the dancing is more of an active action. You do it with your own will, your own accord. So, the contrast between these two are depicted in this stanza. Now, the second stanza and its explanation. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. In this stanza, Wordsworth makes use of hyperbole or exaggeration by saying that he saw 10,000 daffodils at a glance. The word never ending is also an exaggeration. Here, the poet is drawing the attention to the fact that perception can differ from reality. The daffodils can't actually be in a never ending line, but there are so many of them that it seems like they're never ending. Now, so in one sense, William Wordsworth is trying to say that with our eyes, what we see, it's never ending, but it is not truly never ending. Now, we should note how the dancing from the previous stanza has become a sprightly dance. It's become even more vibrant now, and in addition, tossing their heads really does make it seem as the flowers have an active will of their own. The third stanza and its explanation. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what will the show to me had brought. In the beginning of this stanza, the poet describes human qualities to the natural world. In this stanza, it's not only the flowers that have a human quality, but also the waves that are dancing. The intensity of emotions is conveyed in this stanza, and the emotions and the vibrant feeling is also increasing as compared to the previous stanza. In the previous stanza, the flowers were sprightly, but now they're full of glee. Now, it means in this, do you realize that when someone is happy and full of glee, it's like an infection, like it passes on from one to another. So over here it shows how the daffodil's glee has been passed on to the waves, and from the waves to the poet himself. The repetition of the word gazed is showing how the poet was looking at that scene for a long time. He also notes in this stanza that he had no thoughts about the wealth this scene had given him. And the use of the word show suggests it was a rehearsed performance. It is almost as though the poet is suggesting the daffodils are a protagonist in the theatrical show. Also notice that this stanza ends with a colon, suggesting a continuation of thoughts. In grammatical terms, colons are often used before definitions and explanations. So we can expect the final stanza to show us and the more meaning and exemplify the meaning of the previous section of the poem. Now we move on to the fourth stanza and its explanation. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is a bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. For often conveys the meaning of because. This word seems to suggest that the stanza will present us the explanation for which the poet is watching the show that brought him wealth. Doesn't the image of lying on a couch suggest the idea of being in a psychiatrist's office? William Wordsworth seems to be suggesting that recalling the scene with the daffodils is like therapy to him. The inward eye is the memory on which the scene has been imprinted. In such a way, it flashes to life when he is sad. Now, when he is in a vacant or a pensive mood, note again how the word flash suggests an active action. The poet doesn't say that he deliberately tries to remember the scene. The scene just flashes into his mind, and it flashes more often as it has a will of its own. That allows it to enter the poet's mind whenever he's in a gloomy mood. And once he sees when it flashes into the inward eye, his heart is then filled with pleasure. The word bliss and pleasure continues the sense of glee from the previous paragraph. And so this small little show that he had seen brings him joy and happiness in his life ahead, and his heart fills with so much pleasure that it dances with the daffodils, as it's almost as the scene here is recreated. And now the poet can also actually participate in the show rather than just being an observer. Now we will discuss some commonly asked question and answers. We will start with the stanza. Continues as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. Now, what does they refer to in this stanza? In this stanza, they refers to golden daffodils. Why have they been compared to the Milky Way? They have been compared to the Milky Way because the poet feels the number of daffodils is unending, just like the stars in the Milky Way. Pick out an example of personifications from this line. What is the picture created to this description? The example of personification is tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The picture created by this description is one of the happy dancers dancing and tossing their heads against each other in a very happy situation. Find an example of rhyming couplet from these lines. The example for rhyming couplet from these lines are 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. We go to the next stanza. "10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. What does the poet see at glance? Were they really 10,000 in number? The poet saw countless number of daffodils at dance. And no, they were not really 10,000 in number. It is the way the poet is describing the innumerable and unending sight of daffodils. The use of such things is called a hyperbole. How do they outdo the waves? Now, the daffodils outdid the waves in happiness and joy, for they were both happy. But the daffodils appeared to the poet much happier than the waves, and that's how the poet describes the way daffodils outdid the waves. What do the waves refer to? The waves refer to the raised lines of water that fly over the surfaces of the daffodils. How did the scene affect the poet? The scene affected the poet emotionally. It made the poet feel emotionally satisfied and blissful. Pick out 3 words by the meaning being happy. The words that mean happy are glee, gay, and jocund. Find 2 examples of personifications from these lines. Tossing their heads in sprightly dance, and the waves beside them danced. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. In this stanza, what is the wealth that poet is referring to in these lines? What kind of poetic device is being used? The poet is referred to the wealth of being happy, the wealth of joy. It is the reference of material gains or whatever amount to be worldly. It is a wealth of being happy in the company of daffodils. The poetic device used in it is metaphor. Why does poet refer to it as wealth? The poet refers to it as wealth because it brings both emotional and spiritual satisfaction and emotional bliss. When does the poet feel blissful? The poet feels blissful even when he is not in the company of daffodils, and also simply when he gets reminded of them. Why does the poet refer to it as being a blissful state? The poet refers to it as being a blissful state because he derives a spiritual and emotional bliss even when the poet is completely alone, where a normal person cannot be but sad. The remembrance of the beauty of daffodils make his solitude blissful. Had the poet realized the importance of the scene when he had first seen it? Give reason for your answer. No, the poet had not realized the significance of the scene when he had seen it. Because in accordance with the poet, he could not visualize what wealth of joy the sight of daffodils had brought him. He could scarcely believe that the recollection of the scene of the daffodils would make his vacant times a source of happiness and satisfaction. Thank you all for watching, and if you want more question and answers, please follow. Bye. Good luck for your exams.